Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 682 for February 25th, 2018. This week we're in the Boston area at Julio's Liquors in Westborough, Massachusetts for their annual Go Whiskey weekend. Coming up in just a few minutes.
My mom's kind of a hard ass. She doesn't cry a lot. But she's ecstatic and tears were more from my dad, of all things. But my mom was just like, yeah, like kind of, I knew you would do it one day. Like I knew you'd be there and just so proud.
This week, Brown-Forman promoted Elizabeth McCall to Assistant Master Distiller for Woodford Reserve Bourbon and put her on the track to become one of the first women to serve as a Master Distiller for a major bourbon brand. What makes her story even more unusual, she did not follow her father into the whiskey business. She followed in her mom's footsteps. That story is coming up later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the calendar of events, this week's Your Voice, and the What I'm Tasting This Week department, all coming up on this week's WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
You don't need a special occasion to celebrate with something truly unique. But a personally engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label can make any occasion special. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnniewalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. And we'll start with a story that you're hearing first right here on WhiskyCast. The classic rock band Metallica has been performing the song Whiskey in a Jar for years and is now working on putting its own whiskey in a bottle. That's a little tidbit veteran distiller and consultant Dave Pickerell dropped on me this weekend here in the Boston area. We'd been talking about his work with WhistlePig Rye nearby in Vermont when I asked what his other clients were working on.
There may be a little something with a brand called Metallica. That I've just been permitted to announce that I'm working on a little project with them, and that could be fun.
Oh, really? What can you talk about it yet?
Well, I can just say that we're going to make a killer whiskey product and probably build a little distillery someplace, and putting all the logistics together on it now, and we're crashing as hard as we can crash.
The band is going to invest in a distillery.
Yes, that would be correct. We're already deep into it, and I am being given some very nice poetic license, and and as you would expect from a band with the artisanal bent that Metallica does, that they would want this to be a true artisanal product, and so we're having some fun. I can't go into a lot more detail yet because there's still a lot of stuff up in the air. I've kind of been throwing out some, what if we did this, and what if we did this, and how about if we did this, and so we're kind of playing around with some ideas still, but we're running at it real hard.
Where are you going to build the distillery?
Good question. There's three choices that seem to make sense. San Francisco, the home of Metallica, Louisville, the home of bourbon, and Nashville, the home of music. So one of those three seems to make sense. I'm voting for San Francisco or Bay Area if nothing falls apart.
The band's management has not confirmed this yet, but we might get some confirmation as early as this Monday when Metallica is expected to announce its plans for a 2018 North American concert tour online. I mentioned that I'd been talking with Dave about WhistlePig, where there is also news to report from WhistlePig Farm. Last year, the Vermont distillery released its first whiskey with spirit distilled on the farm, farm stock crop number 1. Now, the second crop is on the way.
Farm stock crop 2 should be out in most markets in mid-April or so. We're really excited about it. It will be straight rye, finally, which means that our distillate is finally over 2 years old, and we're excited about it. We just had a blending exercise downstairs today here, and had a lot of great fun. And today's winning entry is right here in my pocket.
So tell me about the evolution, because the original farm stock crop one was 20% or so of your young juice from the distillery in Vermont.
Right, so farm stock is a transitional product for us. Crop one was, so we call it rye crop one, was 20% distillate from our Vermont distillery, between a year and 18 months old, triple terroir, our water, our grain, and our wood, all from the same field. We think we're the first distillery in the world to claim that. The next 49% was 5 to 6-year-old from Alberta, double terroir, our water and our wood. The last 31% was 12-year-old from MGPI, just our water. And the idea was, first of all, it's more of an entry-level, easy-drinking product. But we want you to, we want it to be holistically delicious. I also want you to be able to taste the components, because one of our stories is, look, Mom, we're finally making our own whiskey. So you can taste some of the citrusy, grainy notes from the young rye. You can taste some of the spicy rye from the older rye, and some of the big caramel backbone from our wood. Crop 2 will be a higher percent Vermont distillate at an older age, and it will continue to grow year on year until finally it's 100% Vermont distillate. And so the elegant answer would be for people to buy 2 bottles, one to have and one to consume, so that by the time we're at 100% Vermont product, they can do a grand vertical and see how bad I screwed up.
Anything else going on up there? I know you guys just built a new warehousing complex. Explain that.
Yeah, we've got a really nice purpose-built warehousing complex, and we're getting away from stuffing things in every barn in the countryside, and doing it right and proper in real, honest-to-goodness, purpose-built warehouses. And we're excited about that. It'll just make it logistically easier for us to do our aging and to get barrels in and out and have a real, well-designed filling and draining system, as opposed to an ad hoc system that we've had for the first 8 years.
But you put it in New York, just a few miles to the east, right?
That's a pragmatic issue. In Vermont, the laws between Vermont and New York are dramatically different. I mean, if we had to do it again, I probably would have just put the whole distillery in New York, because the laws are so much more conducive. It was just an easier do to move it to New York. It's 6 miles from the distillery, so it's nothing in terms. It's not going to change the maturation. It's just going to make the laws easier, because in Vermont we're limited to a certain small number of barrels per building, just because that's what the Vermont government decided to do, and which meant we were buying every loose barn in the neighborhood, just stuffing barrels in it. And logistically, that's a nightmare, getting trucks in and out and moving barrels around. And so we just finally said, it's costing us an arm and a leg to do this. It's going to cause our product price to go up. We're just going to build a purpose-built warehouse complex and make it easy on ourselves.
By the way, even though the whiskey is being matured across the state line in New York, it'll still be referred to as a Vermont whiskey, since it's being distilled and bottled on the WhistlePig Farm. Last time around, we reported on Glenmorangy's expansion plans in the Scottish Highlands, and this week we got word that the Glenmorangy Company is also planning a similar expansion at Isla's Ardbeg Distillery. As Ardbeg likes to do, the announcement went out in an email to Ardbeg Committee members from distillery manager Mickey Heads. Ardbeg is seeking planning approval from the Argyll and Bute Council to build a second still house that will hold 2 new stills. The building will be built on a vacant piece of the distillery site that was once used for maturation warehouses. That's assuming local officials sign off on the project. Assuming they do, construction begins later this year. Work is already underway on a new boiler house at the distillery. Meanwhile, ScotchWhiskey.com reported as part of their Ardbeg coverage that Laphroaig is planning an expansion just up the road. We've been tracking this project for a while now, and distillery manager John Campbell told me in an email this week that Beam Suntory executives are still reviewing plans for the project, and no decision has been made on a timeline as of yet. Other than adding new maturation warehouses, there has not been a major expansion at Laphroaig since the early 1970s. We'll keep you posted once a final decision is made. Now, back in August of 2016, we reported in episode 602 on Isle of Arran's plans to build a second distillery on the island. We have an update this week on the Laphroaig Distillery. The distillery is on track to begin production near the end of this year, and Aaron plans to put the first 700 casks of heavily peated single malt from the new distillery on sale to collectors and investors, with no other casks to be available for private sale for at least the first 10 years of production time. The price tag, £6,000 each. That's around $8,400 at current exchange rates, and it includes storage costs for the first 10 years of maturation. Last time around, I reported on the start of whiskey production at Sazerac's Old Montreal Distillery. Spent a few minutes on the phone this week with Sazerac Master Blender and Canadian native Drew Mayville discussing the return of whiskey distilling to Montreal.
We've been in the Canadian market for quite a few years in different products that we produce, but this will be the first time we have total control of what we're doing and actually being able to make new whiskeys, which is the exciting part for me.
What's your timeline for, well, first of all, before we talk about timelines, because that's still 3 years off, but...
That's a minimum. Come on.
But tell me about the process of going in and taking an existing building, an existing distillery, and essentially gutting the place and refurbishing it.
Yeah, well, we didn't gut everything. There's some pieces that we used, but we got a new still and some new equipment, to be able to run what we want to run and how much we want to run. But it was the whole objective was to keep as much intact, and if we couldn't, and we built it out, like for instance, we had some flooring that we wanted to keep because it was old and beautiful, and we repurposed that. So it was kind of like the combination of using some existing equipment and materials, but at the same time, like you said, almost gutting it and making room for the new, just because of the size of the still. It's not a small still.
How big is it? It's 18 inches diameter, big column still, right?
Yeah, it's 18, and I think it's about 30, almost 40, 37 feet tall. So definitely lots of capabilities in different directions. Depends which way we want to go.
You grew up in Canada, obviously. This has to be a source of pride for you to bring whiskey production back to Montreal.
Oh, yeah, I actually worked in Montreal for 16 years, as a matter of fact, for Seagram. And then with Diageo. So you're right, it does have a lot of meaning to me personally. And again, we do have lots of things going on all over the world, but this is close to home, so to speak. As a matter of fact, my mother still lives up there, so it gives me an opportunity to visit too at the same time.
Sazerac's current Canadian whiskey portfolio includes Caribou Crossing, Royal Canadian, Rich and Rare, and several other brands, all produced with sourced whiskey for the time being. One more update out of last week's episode. The European Court of Justice has rejected the Scotch Whisky Association's bid to stop Germany's Waldhorn distillery from calling its single malt whiskey Glenbuchenbach. According to the drinks business, the court ruled that while the word Glen is Gallic in origin, it is a legitimate translation for the German word Tal. Both words mean valley, and Buchenbach is a stream near the distillery. The ruling said using the word Glen did not evoke Scotland to the point where it would violate European laws, since the label also clearly indicated the whiskey's German origin. No reaction yet from the Scotch Whisky Association on that ruling. Looking at new whiskeys now, last year Tomatin unveiled its 5 Virtues series based on the natural elements of wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. The wood, fire, and earth editions were released at that time, and now the metal and water editions are being released to complete the series. Metal gets its name, as you might expect, from the distillery's copper stills and is matured in first fill ex-bourbon barrels, while water gets its name from the burn where Tomatin draws its water from. It's matured in ex-sherry butts. They're both available at UK whiskey shops for around £50. That's about $70 US. Meanwhile, GlenDronach is out with batch number 16 of its single cask releases. There are 15 different bottlings ranging in age from 11 to 28 years old, all matured in a variety of ex-sherry casks. They'll be available at whiskey shops in Europe, Asia, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And a couple of notes from Islay now. We can now confirm almost everything about this year's Ardbeg Committee bottling, except the name, including the release date. It is scheduled to make its U.S. debut right here at Julio's Liquors in Westborough, Massachusetts, at a March 14th release party. While the likely name has been widely reported on social media, after a few people found what looks to be a legitimate label approval application on the Treasury Department's Tax and Trade Bureau website, Dr. Bill Lumsden told me last week that he is still not confirming anything yet.
I am intrigued because I've had a lot of people, hardcore geeks, who do look at the TTB stuff and all that. Suffice to say, the platform from a marketing perspective is it's not peace and love, it's Pete and love. And we're going back to the sort of 1960s where everything was groovy. And that's the big clue here, groovy.
So we're looking at grooved casks to get more wood on there.
I cannot confirm or deny that, Mark. But between us girls, yeah.
As in the past, the committee bottling will be followed around Islay Festival time at the end of May by a wider release at a different bottling strength. No details on pricing or availability, other than through the Ardbeg Committee website, have been disclosed yet. Meanwhile, Laphroaig will be bottling this year's Cairdeas release in the next few weeks. Simon Brooking of Laphroaig confirmed to me this weekend that the 2018 Cairdeas will be a Fino sherry cask finished single malt.
I'll be there in a couple of weeks, be able to sample it and see how it's finishing there, because we're getting ready for bottling soon on that. It's going to be a dry, nutty Cairdeas, different from this last year's quarter cask strength, which is more the traditional. This is John in more of his experimental series, so be fun to see and taste.
The annual Cairdeas release traditionally makes its debut at the Islay Festival of Malt and Music each May, with a wider release after that. We'll have more details as they're available. Meanwhile, we had a couple of new entries in the Bottled in Bond segment of the American whiskey market this week. Heaven Hill announced plans to start releasing an 11-year-old Bottled in Bond edition of Old Fitzgerald this spring, with new releases each spring and fall. The first batch will not be bottled until April and will use barrels that were filled back in the spring season of 2006. It'll come in a decanter that replicates the Old Fitzgerald diamond decanters of the 1950s. It'll sell for around $110 a bottle. And Beam Suntory is giving its Old Overholt Rye brand some love with a new Bottled in Bond version. Old Overholt Bonded is a 4-year-old straight rye distilled at the Jim Beam Distillery in Claremont, Kentucky. It's the first Bottled in Bond release for the Old Overholt brand in more than 50 years, according to Beam, and it'll sell for around $25 a bottle. I received a sample this week, and I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. Also on the rye whiskey front, Minneapolis-based Tattersall Distilling is releasing its first straight rye whiskey. Tattersall has been making a wide variety of spirits while its whiskeys mature, and this one is a Monongahela-style rye with 85% Hazlitt rye, grown just north of Minneapolis and matured in barrels made in Minnesota. John Kreidler is one of Tattersall's founders.
We just wanted to go with a big rye spirit, and as opposed to more the kind of the Maryland style where you're using more corn. We just really wanted to focus it on the rye itself to have it a little more distinguished from some of the bourbons that we're doing, which we also have a rye bourbon, and so we just kind of want to go to the one a little bit of a further extreme with it and really showcase the rye itself.
And tell me about the distillery. How long have you guys been around? I'm assuming a couple of years at least.
Yeah, we're just coming up on 3 years now. We started distributing and opened up our cocktail room in July of 2015. The distillery, we're about 30,000 square feet. We have a big focus on our cocktail room. In Minnesota, there's a law that you can have on sale sales, and you can do a cocktail room, but you only can serve what you produce. With our background, our background's a lot of bartenders, and so we wanted to create basically our own bar. And so we've built a pretty extensive portfolio. We make about 30 different unique spirits, and which allows us to essentially make whatever we want behind the bar, other than tequila drinks at this point.
Right now, Tattersall Rye is only available in Minnesota. There are also 2 different bourbons still maturing in Tattersall's Ricks, with a release not likely for at least another year. On the Irish whiskey front, I've mentioned Louise McGuane's Chapel Gate Whiskey Company a number of times in the past. Her J.J. Cory Irish whiskey is finally about to make its U.S. debut. It'll go on sale in Tennessee and Connecticut in March, with several more northeastern states expected later this spring. More details as they're available. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park. You might not be able to get the entire range of Highland Park's single malts from Orkney, depending on where you live, but you can still get a bit of Orkney anywhere you go in the world. Just check out Highland Park's playlists on Spotify. And, of course, the music is best enjoyed with a dram of Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. Find out more at highlandparkwhiskey.com.
You don't need a special occasion to open a bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label. But when you have a special occasion, why not celebrate with a specially engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label? Here's how one whiskey lover celebrated his team's recent success. He arranged to have 108 specially engraved bottles of Johnnie Walker Blue Label made for his co-workers. You might say he hit a home run. Just like a perfectly executed double play, Johnnie Walker Blue Label is smooth and well-rounded, and unlike a trophy, never needs polishing. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnniewalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
Johnnie Walker Blue Label Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Once again, I'm on the road this weekend at Julio's Liquors in Westborough, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston, for the Julio's annual Go Whiskey weekend. It's a 5-day-long festival with dinners, tastings, master classes, and a whole lot more. And it's usually held on the 3rd weekend in February each year. If you're in the New England area or planning to visit next February, mark it on your calendar. Let's open up the inbox now for this week's Your Voice, brought to you by Lot 40. After I talked with Dave Pickerell Saturday afternoon about his new partnership with Metallica, I posted the news on social media, and there was, as you might guess, immediate reaction. Tom Dean at Meerkat1984 on Twitter tweeted this: "I hope you aren't teasing me because this would be the best thing ever." Tom, would I do that? We had several people make references to Metallica's song Obey Your Master, with the reference Obey Your Master Distiller. But Garrett Malt on Twitter was the only one to include a GIF with it. King Rhino at King Rhinola tweeted from New Orleans, "Makes sense. They've been performing Whiskey in the Jar for years. I'm thinking Ride the Whiskey, Whiskey of Puppets, Whiskey Wired to Self-Destruct." Thanks, King. And Josh Wright at Sipology blog on Twitter is a bit more cynical. "I'm hoping this will be 80s style Metallica bourbon, but as we all know, it's probably going to be current Metallica style bourbon." I hauled a bunch of boxes full of Glencairn glasses to the post office this week to ship out to some of our recent contest and Whiskey Club of the Month winners. Scott Rittenbaugh of the Pittsburgh Whiskey Friends tweeted this note back, along with a few pictures. "Hey, Mark, just wanted to let you know that the WhiskyCast Glencairn glasses arrived today. My cat, Parker Beam, approves. We will be using them for our upcoming series of blind tastings." Apparently, Scott's Parker Beam is into packing peanuts, judging from the picture. And how's this for a Twitter handle? At Neville M, or Mick Controls the Spice, Controls the Universe, jumped into a tweet storm of dog photos with this comment: "I know we're not talking whiskey right now, but I see that we're sharing dog pictures, so here is my dog named Whisky. So now we're all back on topic. Oh, what a sweetie. And by the way, we do have a whole page on the WhiskyCast website devoted to whiskey-related fur baby names. You'll find it in the pub section. And, of course, if there's something else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always post it on the Your Voice page at WhiskyCast.com. You can also get in touch with us online on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, or Instagram at WhiskyCast. And if you're not into that social media stuff, my email address is comments@whiskycast.com. This week's Your Voice is brought to you by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Time now for the WhiskyCast Calendar of Events. Lots of events to choose from all over the world. Tickets are still available for Whiskey Live New York this coming Wednesday night, February 28th, along with Whiskey Live in Washington, D.C., Friday night, March 2nd. The Miami Whiskey Mash is this coming Saturday, March 3rd in Miami, Florida, along with Whiskey Birmingham in Birmingham, England. The New Orleans Bourbon Festival is March 8th through the 10th. And I'll be in Waco, Texas that weekend for the Balcones Rye Fest weekend at Balcones Distillery. The Whiskey Jubilee Seattle, once again, the emphasis is on the Jew in Jubilee. It's March 15th. It'll be a triple Fred night as Fred Minnick interviews Fred No and Freddie No of Jim Beam that same night at the Kentucky Derby Museum's Bourbon Masters Series event in Louisville. And the Midlands Whiskey Festival is March 16th and 17th in Stourbridge, England. Right now, we have 212 different events around the world on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. Just use the search button on the calendar page to find an event near you or where you may be traveling soon. Of course, if you have a festival or a tasting coming up that you'd like to let people know about, just use the contact form on our website and let us know about it.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. In many ways, the whiskey business is really not that much different from other industries. Succession planning is really a key to long-term success. But in the whiskey business, when your product's quality and consistency relies on the skills of a handful of people, those long-term succession plans become even more important. Now, let's make it very clear, Woodford Reserve and Brown-Forman Master Distiller Chris Morris is not going anywhere anytime soon. But his heart surgery last September that kept him from attending his induction into the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame might just have speeded up Brown-Forman's planning process a bit. Elizabeth McCall helped accept Chris's Hall of Fame honors last fall while he was hospitalized. For the last several years, she's been Woodford Reserve's master taster and an apprentice to Chris Morris. This week, Brown-Forman promoted her to Assistant Master Distiller for Woodford Reserve, putting her on the track to eventually take over for Chris. But once again, not before he's good and ready.
Elizabeth, tell me first of all what you were feeling and what went through your mind when they finally told you get to be Assistant Master Distiller now.
I get very emotional because it's something that when I got asked to train to be master taster, which was in the summer of 2014, we had talked about, and Chris it was very much, I didn't even know what the role of master taster would look like or be and what that meant. But I remember him telling me that, it would kind of along the lines that it could potentially be a master distiller, that when he was asked to be master distiller, it was like that was your path at Brown-Forman. And so we'd always kind of talked about it, and it'd been such a long time of talking about it. And then, of course, the closer and more recent months, it had been more prevalent that Chris would be like, this is my protege. he just kept saying it, and it's like, okay, sure. And then to be sitting at the table, I went to lunch with Chris Morris, and then Mark Bacon, our global brand director, had no idea what they were about to tell me. And they're like, well, we have really exciting news. And I was like, okay, what's that? And they're like, we'd like to tell you that we'd like to ask you if you would take on the role to be Assistant Master Distiller. And I just started shaking. I mean, and when I got home that night, I was still shaking with just excitement. And, how do you describe something that I never, ever in my wildest dreams thought that would be where I'd be in my career. I still, right now, it's like when people are introducing me and I'm like, Assistant Master Distiller, really? Can I do this? Because this is Chris's child. Woodford Reserve means so much to him, and that he has that much respect and for me, and sees that he trusts me to carry this out and to take good care of Woodford Reserve, because it's very special. And it's even going back to Owsley Brown II, who it was his vision, and it almost gives me goosebumps thinking about this brand that's just so special, and everybody just loves it. And because it's so loved, from the home place to the liquid to the just what the brand means, it's almost overwhelming to think that this is kind of mine in a way, and mine to really take care of. So it's a lot of responsibility, but something I'm so excited about.
Let's explain one thing here, because Brown-Forman uses the term master taster, which nobody else does in the industry. We have a lot of master blenders and master distillers, but you guys are the only ones that use the term master taster. And let's explain what that current role is for people who don't understand it, so we can sort of get the lines clarified here.
Yes. So master taster was, I think, and really it's something that as a company, they're still sort of trying to define in terms of, for me, with my career path and my potential, because I came from research and development. So I had the production background in a lot of ways, and got my analytical training and could do all the testing to know color, proof, turbidity, pH. I was doing that in the lab, and then also doing the sensory testing and looking at it from a quality control standpoint. So I was already in my sensory role, kind of doing a lot of things, going out to distilleries, understanding the production process, so I could see where potential issues could arise in the quality of our product. And that was just part of what I was doing in that sensory role. And then as my career at Brown-Forman developed, they were looking for somebody they were doing succession planning, thinking about the future. Chris Morris isn't going to be around forever. How do we find people that could potentially step into the master distiller role, and kind of a way to groom people and vet them out and see, because the master taster role or the master distiller role, like it has so many different sides to it. So for my development plan, the master taster role was, can I get up and speak and tell the story in front of large groups of people? There's a training on, you had to be a sensory panelist, you had to be an expert level taster within the company, and that was just a training that Chris Morris put together. And then it was also having the outward side, so being able to present to people and really be able to understand our products from full-on quality, so that if you're out tasting and when you're hosting people at the distillery on personal selections, you can identify if there's an issue with the liquid. Because the last thing you'd want is to sit down like, oh, we just opened these barrels up. They haven't really been, we tasted them a while ago, but if there's an issue, you want somebody who can understand what the issue is and kind of navigate people around it, or say, have the authority to say, you know what, this isn't a good representation of Woodford Reserve. Let's not use this sample. So there's a level of expertise for that. But it also, on my progression, it was a stepping stone for, could this individual be the next master distiller, or step into the assistant master distiller role and then further on. So it was more of a development stepping stone for me. And I think as a brand, we do want to have somebody else step into the master taster role, now that I'm no longer in it, to host people at the distillery to host personal selections and to be a part of the quality of tasting our product. But I don't know if they will necessarily have to have as much of the production, because I was my role as master taster was master taster and senior quality control specialist at Woodford Reserve. So I had still production responsibilities. I still will hold production responsibilities with the Assistant Master Distiller role, but it won't be part of my title necessarily. I mean, Assistant Master Distiller kind of assumes that you will be doing production work, and so we're still working to further define Master Taster as we move forward for who that would look like. But for me, it was a progression to potentially step into this Assistant Master Distiller role.
I know that you have the Master Tasters for a couple of different brands. You were doing it for Woodford. Jackie Zykan was doing it for Old Forester and is still doing it for Old Forester. Let me correct that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But tell me about your background, because as near as I can tell, and I could be dead wrong on this, you are the first woman to follow her mother into the business and become on the pathway to becoming Master Distiller. Because you followed your mom. A lot of guys follow their dads, and a few daughters follow their dads. But I can't recall anybody following their mom.
Yeah, and my mom, it's so funny thinking back about, because my mom, she did that right after in graduate school, and then after graduate school, she worked at Seagram's and was in production and for their bottling, and managed a line of a large group of men. And when she talks about her time, because after she had my brother, she did end up leaving the industry and just worked stay-at-home mom for a while, which she does regret, because I don't think she even realized how impactful what she was doing was at the time. She just was doing her job, and that's what she's always instilled in me. So following my mom's footsteps is one of those things where one day we're sitting around talking, and it's like, gosh, Mom, like, you were paving this path, back in the late 70s, early 80s. And she didn't even think of it that way. And she's like, yeah, and we sat down, we started sharing experience about what it was like for her being a woman, managing a team of people and looking at products from packaging standpoint, but also liquid quality, making sure it was tasting right. And she wasn't actually in the distilling side of it, but how when she went on maternity leave and she got pregnant, there was no such thing as a maternity policy, because they didn't have women in those roles, and just having a voice and being able to speak up. And my mom's just always had that kind of gusto about herself, and it's never been it's just not, how do I want to say it? I never grew up thinking I didn't have a voice, because my mom always just voiced her opinion. And it wasn't like, well, you shouldn't say things like that, or you shouldn't do that. It's just like, if that's what you want to do, do it. And there should be no reason why you can't. And it's just something I think in the nature of my mom, and she instilled that in me. And my dad too. I mean, my dad's always been so supportive of everything, and never been he's always just been a man who's, you're my daughter, you can do whatever you want. And so growing up in a household where the sky's the limit is kind of the attitude.
So what did your mom say when you told her about the promotion?
Oh, she was ecstatic. I mean, going back to just getting my job at Brown-Forman, being in an alcohol company, and she just has always been like, because I got my master's degree in counseling psychology. I was supposed to be a therapist. That was kind of what I thought my career path in life would be. And, I found out about the job at Brown-Forman. She's like, oh, you've got to, that would be so amazing, working it's a great company. And, I worked in the alcohol industry. It's such a great area to work in. And she was so excited and gung-ho when I first even applied to be in the company. And so then just this progression, I mean, she's just in awe and so proud of just making my mark and kind of doing the career that she kind of wishes she had done, that she had kept going in it and didn't stop. And so she always encourages me. She's like, even when you have kids, don't stop working. Like, you can do it. You'll figure it out. Don't do that.
So were there some tears when you told her?
Oh yeah, there definitely were. I mean, more on my end. My mom's kind of a hard ass. She doesn't cry a lot, so, but she's ecstatic, and tears were more from my dad, of all things. But my mom was just like, yeah, like kind of, I knew you would do it one day. Like I knew you'd be there, and just so proud.
As the father of 3 daughters, I can tell you that dads cry a lot more often than you'd let on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, my dad's definitely the crier.
You were talking about your master's degree in psychology. What's the rest of your background? And, I mean, we should point out that in some ways you're still a mental health professional. You're just improving it from a different point of view.
Exactly. Any bartender you talk to, they're like, well, this is a form of therapy. And I'm like, you are so right. You know, people have a drink and it opens them up. It's like, if you're going to sit down with friends and talk, it's like, let's go have a drink and talk this out. So it is a form of therapy for sure. And I just make sure that when you're having those little therapy sessions, you're having the greatest quality bourbon around to share those moments with each other. But yeah, my background, so starting out in school, I mean, first of all, going back even more, my mom, this is one thing my mom loves telling the story of. I had a teacher in 3rd grade, and she told my parents, well, Elizabeth's just, you're never going to really be a good student. She won't really do really well in school. Like that's just, you know, she's just not a really studious kind of kid. And that fired both my parents up. And my mom was like, well, that's just not, I mean, so anytime I do anything in my life, she's like, I just want to go back to your 3rd grade teacher and tell her what you're doing now. And it turns out I had ADD, so ADHD, the inattentive type. And it was a struggle. School was a struggle for me. And so I had to figure out how do I manage through that. And so that was kind of where I think a lot of my passion for mental health came in with that. And so I got my undergrad in psychology at the University of Louisville, and then went ahead and I didn't know what I was going to do. I'm like, I'm not ready to enter the real world. So I went in and did my master's in counseling psychology, thinking that was what I wanted. And then really getting the opportunity to sit down and do therapy sessions with people in my internships and my practicum, it was like, I don't know if I can do this. And it really kind of freaked me out. But even though I got all the people I worked with, they always, you know, had very high praise for the work they'd done with me. But it was all by chance. I mean, everything in life is so interesting, and timing is so crucial to career paths and paths in life. And I was at my younger brother's graduation party, and a man who worked for Brown-Forman was there, and he heard me talking about like, oh, I've got to find a job as a therapist, and I'm nervous about it, and I don't know. And plus the other side of it is that I was overqualified, but I didn't have any experience. So it was like I just spent all this time going to school and had to take a job that would have been somebody who had a high school degree. I mean, that was kind of what I was looking at career-wise, and I'm like, oh, gosh, it just was not very appetizing. So when this man told me about a job at Brown-Forman in the alcohol industry, a fantastic company. I mean, Brown-Forman is in Louisville, like the creme de la creme. Everybody wants to work for Brown-Forman. And then it was setting up taste panels and doing sensory. And it really appealed to, he was like, you're going to have to wash dishes, and but you recruit people to come and taste, and it's a lot of fun. And I was like, I love interacting with people. I mean, that was part of the appeal of therapy, was conversation with people and just engaging with them. And so it was like, oh, I can recruit people to drink. How hard can that be? You know, it's alcohol. And I was like, I don't care if I'm washing dishes. So when I started the interview process, I mean, they were kind of like, well, you know, you're a little overqualified for this job, which I was so sick of hearing that. Like, I just want the job. You know, I want to work there. I don't care if it's below my educational background. So I interviewed and I got the job. And so it was a lot of data entry and not really necessarily analyzing the results, but it was wash dishes, set up taste panels, churn out reports, and send them to your manager. And then who, interestingly enough, so when I hired in, Chris Fletcher, who is the Assistant Master Distiller at Jack Daniel's now, he was my hiring boss, manager when I got into Brown-Forman. So now it's all kind of, it's just fun. Now we're kind of on sort of the same level, but I started, and so it was very entry, and then I just have a thirst for wanting to keep learning, and here's an opportunity to improve this process, and then I don't know, now here I am. So it's been quite the ride, for sure.
Now, a lot of distillers come out of the chemistry side of things and have their degrees in chemical engineering and all that. How did you pick up the chemistry side of things? Because I know I was not the brightest chemistry student on the face of the earth in high school, and of course didn't even think about taking it in college. But how did you pick up all the scientific stuff that you have to have as a distiller?
So that's so interesting. I was terrified of science, chemistry, and I don't know. And I talk to people about that now because I love it so much. It just makes sense. And when I took chemistry in high school, I remember explaining to my mom. She's like, going through it, I don't know why my idea of it, I was very intimidated. But once I got in the weeds of doing the work, I loved it because it was like, well, you put this and this together, it changes and it becomes this. And it just was, just made sense. And so I would do the equations in chemistry and it really had fun with it and was successful. But again, going into college, I was very intimidated and I thought, well, I can't do that. So I'm going to stick with going into the art side of it. So I have a bachelor in arts. So I stayed as far away from science and chemistry as I possibly could. But getting into the lab at Brown-Forman, my opportunity to work in the chemical area, well, really it comes from, I'm a very independent person and I hate having to ask people to do things for me. And I got to the point where I'd need to run an alcohol on a sample I was testing or run color on it. And I'd have to always ask one of the analytical technicians, can you run this for me? And it got to the point where I don't want to have to ask you to do that anymore. So I started doing it myself, just get on the instrument, have them train me how to use it, and started running those things and understanding what it all means, like in, percent ABV versus proof and color specs and where does color come from and turbidity and suspended particles and fatty acids in your alcohol. And it was like, this is so cool. And we had one of my colleagues, she went out on maternity leave, and I was like, I can cover her stuff for analytical. And so I got fully certified as an analytical chemist within Brown-Forman. So no degree in it, but at Brown-Forman I passed all the testing and started running her analytical tests while she was on maternity leave. And it just kind of helps the whole picture come together. From a sensory standpoint, understanding the analytical analysis of the liquid as well. And so that just helped building on my career. And then it was like, okay, now I get this side of it. Now I want to go out in the production facility and see it. And I just voiced it to my manager, like, hey, I think I need to start doing more of this stuff because it's going to help me improve the quality of our liquid from a sensory side. So yeah, it was just very kind of organically happened with the need in my learning within the lab. And so now, and my brothers even, they kind of laugh, I've got a white lab coat that has my name on it. And they're like, never in a million years would I would have been like, oh, scientist, that's my sister, because it just isn't when you meet me, you probably wouldn't think that would be where my brain was. But now it is. I love the science and the math side of things.
You realize that in this new job, you are now going to be a role model for young women in the STEM professions, right?
And I will encourage every young girl to do it. It's so cool. I mean, I wish I had the guts to pursue it. And I don't really know why, because I know that my parents would have encouraged it no matter what. But I think I just, for whatever reason, I was like, no, I should stay away from it. Even though I loved it, it's very bizarre to think back on now. But you're exactly right.
Do you see yourself doing some of that as you, on the public side, even though working with an alcohol company, it might be kind of difficult to speak to high school groups of underage kids, but do you see yourself doing that?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I mean, that's what, when my brother, my older brother is a high school teacher, and he's the basketball coach too. So I spend a lot of time going to the games and watching. And every time I talk to some of his players that I've gotten to know, it's like I encourage them to stay in school and do the stuff that you're kind of afraid of. If you don't think you can do it, you can do it. I try to encourage as much as I can. I would love to have the opportunity to speak to young women, especially when they're at that. There's just a critical time, and high school is a critical time of learning and trying to understand, and you don't really see the big picture of life. You think that everything that happens in high school is so important, and it doesn't really matter. And going into college, that you can do so much more if you just put your mind to it. And I would just definitely encourage the science path, because it's just fun. It's fascinating. Science is so cool.
Let's look forward a couple of years, 3 to 5 years, maybe 10 years out. I'm going to float 3 names by you, and I want you to tell me what this lineage is going to mean to you. Lincoln Henderson, Chris Morris, Elizabeth McCall, the 3 master distillers in the history of Woodford Reserve.
Yeah. That almost makes me, I mean, if you could see me, you'd see that my eyes are kind of tearing up right now. They're icons in the distilling industry. I never got to meet Lincoln Henderson, but I know the huge amount of respect that everyone has for him and what he did at Brown-Forman, and then just in his career. I mean, he's an icon. And then you look at Chris Morris, and I mean, Chris is somebody that I remember seeing him in the lab when I was a technician, and like, oh, that's the master distiller. Like, he's big deal. And it's weird that I am now, I talk to people who are kind of newer in the company, and they're like, oh, you're Elizabeth, you don't know who I am, but it's so great to meet you. And it's so weird, because I'm like, I'm just a normal person. Like, I'm not as cool as Chris Morris. He's really cool, but not. It's just surreal. And
Chris isn't that cool. Come on.
Yes, he is. He is the coolest. He's the coolest nerd you'll ever meet.
I'm kidding. I've got a lot of respect for Chris. I'm just kidding there.
No. Oh, I know. But he's just somebody that he's like a walking encyclopedia. And I guess I just don't see myself. How am I going to be that? How am I going to fill that expectation that people have of that icon, that person? And I realize in talking to people, and even to Chris, it's, you make it your own. He talks about the first time that he was in the lab after Lincoln left, and it was like sitting down with all these samples and putting together a batch of Woodford Reserve. Like, can I do this? And then he thought, yes, I have been trained. Like, that's what the training process is. And for me, that's why I'm in this role as Assistant Master Distiller. I don't have to have all the answers today, but part of what is so great is building that lineage, with the lineage is building upon the knowledge that Chris has, for him to share that with me. And I will then continue to build my own story and turn it into my own thing. And one day I'll have somebody who is working under me that I can grow up to share all these stories that he shared of Lincoln Henderson, and then his stories, and then I can share both of those down to the next person to carry that on.
Now, we need to note that Chris Morris serves as master distiller for all of the Brown-Forman American whiskey brands, except for Jack Daniel's, where Jeff Arnett holds that title. Elizabeth McCall's job responsibilities will only cover Woodford Reserve for now. And with Brown-Forman preparing to open up its Old Forester distillery in downtown Louisville later this year, it's not clear yet whether Brown-Forman will name an assistant master distiller to cover Old Forester. Last fall, the company named Juan Marizalde Carrillo as the distillery manager for the new Old Forester distillery after years with Brown-Forman. That's this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. Look for the Lagavulin 16-year-old, the Distillers edition, and the new 8-year-old Lagavulin at a whiskey shop near you. And get the story behind these unique whiskeys at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Let's start off with the latest release in Diageo's Orphan Barrel range. Entrapment is a 25-year-old Canadian whiskey that's distilled at Diageo's Crown Royal Distillery in Gimli, Manitoba, and it's the first Orphan Barrel release to come from outside of Kentucky. It's bottled at 41% ABV, and the nose has notes of charred oak, vanilla, caramel, and just a hint of pipe tobacco. The pipe tobacco touch carries over into the taste, along with good spices, a touch of nuttiness, and a nice oaky character. The finish is oaky, but not overly so, with a good balance of dried fruits and a subtle spiciness. I'm scoring the Orphan Barrel Entrapment a 91. I mentioned the new Old Overholt Bonded Rye during the news, and as with all bottled and bond whiskeys, it's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has good spicy notes of clove, cardamom, pipe tobacco, old wet leather, and vanilla. The taste is spicy and mouth-filling with clove, cinnamon, cardamom, honey, vanilla, and just a subtle touch of dried fruits underneath. The finish, it's long and spicy, and at $25 a bottle, it's a good value. I'm scoring the Old Overholt Bonded Rye a 90. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, makers of Whiskey Advocate's 2017 Whiskey of the Year, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. The 12-year-old barrel proof bourbon was pitted blind against competition from around the globe and was consistently ranked number 1 by the magazine's testers. Meet the whole Elijah Craig family at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely. Drink wisely. Let's turn now to the Glenturret Distillery in Scotland. Its single malts don't get a lot of wide distribution, but I was able to get my hands on a couple of samples recently. The Glenturret Sherry Cask, batch number 3, is matured in a combination of American and European oak ex-sherry casks. It's bottled at 43% ABV. The nose has notes of dried fruits, peach pie, toffee, and just a hint of nuttiness. The taste is fruity and mouth-coating with Christmas cake, toffee, cinnamon, and just a hint of almond oil that comes out as the spice begins to fade. That almond oil touch lasts through the finish along with lingering spices, toffee, and dried fruits, along with just a hint of butterscotch. It's a very nice dram, and I'm scoring the Glenturret Sherry Cask, batch number 3, a 92. Now, Glenturret's biggest claim to fame, other than being the brand home for the famous grouse, is Towser, the distillery's longtime cat, who still holds a Guinness World Record for catching almost 29,000 mice during her 24 years at the distillery. Glenturret had a special Towser's cask in its Fill Your Own Bottle display recently, and while that cask is gone now, the current cask is named for one of Towser's 2 successors, Glen. Glen's cask is a first-fill American oak sherry puncheon, and the bottling strength is 59.2% ABV. The nose is fruity with peaches, red apples, fresh berries, honey, and hints of toffee and coconut. The taste is thick, chewy, and powerful with a good balance of spices and vibrant fresh fruits. Cinnamon, clove, and white pepper balance out nicely against fresh peaches, apples, honey, and vanilla. The next distillery cask at Glenturret will be named for Glen's partner in mousing, Turret, but Glen's cask will be a tough act to follow. I'm scoring it a 94. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, and I'll be adding these tasting notes to the searchable list of nearly 2,100 different whiskeys at WhiskyCast.com. That's also where you'll find links for the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast and our WhiskyCast HD video episodes, along with the latest whiskey news, events, and a whole lot more, including a complete archive of past episodes. Thanks to everyone who posted reviews and ratings for us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast sites. Now, when you do that, you do make it easier for other whiskey lovers to discover the show when they're looking for podcasts. And, of course, the easiest way to spread the word about WhiskyCast? Tell a friend. Of course, our cask strength conversation continues all week long online. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast. And my email address is comments at WhiskyCast.com.
You don't need a special occasion to celebrate with something truly unique, but a personally engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label can make any occasion special. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnniewalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018. And most weeks comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. But this week, I'm in Westborough, Massachusetts, at the Julio's Liquors Go Whiskey weekend. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.